بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. I'm out of breath because I've been running back. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa alihi tayyibin tahirin al-ma'sumin. Assalamu alaikum. Alaikum salam, sister. Assalamu alaikum to everyone who is joining. So good to be here with all of you. Man, I'm so much looking forward to today's podcast. I just had 2 back-to-back programs I was speaking in, and I was thinking of today's program. So I'll let my dear brother join and we'll get started. Assalamu alaikum guys who've just joined. Alaikum salam. Inshallah you are well. pk.j.raz. Sounds like a rap name, mashallah. Love 5 Power. I think I know who that is. How do I invite you up to the stage, brother Bilal? Accept it. I'd really appreciate it, inshallah. Alaikum salam, Habibi Sayyidina Sayyid Radi Abbas. Bilal, salam alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The one and only Abbas. How are you, Sayyidina?
I'm so blessed, bro. I've been looking forward to this all day, honestly.
So have I.
Alhamdulillah. Look, I came decked in the white for you, bro. Look at that, man. I made an effort. I'll do my thing up.
They wear white in paradise, right? So
some of us don't know if we're getting there, so you wear white now, you know.
Are we already there? Am I wearing that?
If you're there, I know it's Jannah, but or Toronto, one of the two.
Yeah. Inshallah, we get to the right place.
Inshallah. Why are you wearing dark? Is it a majlis or what's going? Are you?
It's like a navy blue. Like it's supposed to be one of the good colors, no?
MashaAllah. Hey, listen, this Farid, is that our Farid or different Farid who's just commented? Is that our Farid? Farid who we know?
I don't see the comments, honestly.
Oh, okay, that's fine. That should be on your tombstone. Here lies Bilal Muhammad. He didn't see the comments. He just...
No, I've already decided what's going to be on my stone.
You have? Have you actually?
Yeah, I have.
Do you want to share it or is it a secret?
It's not on top.
Okay, fine.
No, it's Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth.
Ah, perfect. If you bring an ayat nur, you have to do the whole ayah. So then that's a very long tombstone, you know.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. You know, I don't want to pay for too much. You know, I want some of my inheritance to be useful, right? Arguably,
Yeah.
I think they charge per letter, right?
Really?
I don't know. Maybe.
Dying is a business, man.
How are you?
I'm blessed. Farid Singh is him, by the way. So, salam alaikum to Farid. And to everyone joining, inshallah. Thank you, all of you, for joining. I'm good, bro. I just rushed back from the center. Just now we had a program. And one of the children finished the Quran. So I had to give, the Quran Khatam event that we do. I had to do a little, all right, now you got to study Quran. You got to keep studying all that stuff. And, I had one of them. Yeah.
It's great. I mean, every time I read the Quran, I try to do khutmah every year for the month of Ramadan and sometimes outside of the month. And every time I do, I feel like I'm refreshing my understanding of the religion. Like you come across you didn't notice before, no matter how many times you notice that, okay, it says things differently here than over there. And I didn't quite notice this verse before. I didn't reflect on it in this way. So it's always good to, it's a treasure, and it's good to open up your treasure and take a look at it from time to time.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. Yeah. It feels new each time. It's like Jadid, it does feel like it's new.
It feels contemporary, like it feels relevant to the time. It feels that there are lessons to be harvested, no matter where or what or who you are. There are always things to pick up. Yeah.
It's a narration, I think. One of the Imams, I think it's Imam Rida alayhi salam as-Sadiq. You're fasting, so I'll say it, but I don't know which one. What he says, like, this book seems new to you because then it keeps being re-understood by each generation.
That's right.
So I think it's in the nature of the book.
There's a hadith that says that there are some verses that were revealed for the deep thinking.
Akhir zaman as well, yeah.
Exactly, the deep thinking communities in the end times. And it was the first few verses of Surah Al-Hadid and Surah Al-Ikhlas.
that verse of the hadith, so something along like how we have been created or something, or some like in 7 days or something like that. And it's like, is this a hint for using science or something? Like, what's going on in this verse? You know, who knows?
I would love to do like a longer study of those verses, because I read their tafsir a very long time ago. I think it goes over Allah and attributes and the creation. But yeah,
It's got that phrase. Allah will, I think, bring from the ground, like bring something from the ground, or along those lines. So Allahu A'lam what it means.
We're not from
I
the
don't
deep
know.
communities, it seems.
Or it's not Akhir Zaman, which, you know, either way.
There's
Yeah.
benefit in that, I suppose.
Do you think we're in Akhir Zaman?
I can't say. There's a brother who's very convinced that we are less than a year away from something.
No.
But honestly, I don't know. I don't like to guess or say when that would take place. Only Allah knows when the hour takes place.
Yeah.
But certainly the signs coming, minor and major. Past generations have come across many of the similar signs, but then we see them coming to light in a very different way in our time. You know, so some of the signs are quite vague in terms of, okay, people will not trust one another anymore, and the good righteous will be disrespected. Many of that we can't necessarily prove or disprove for a particular time, but the pattern in general is that in the end times there is a reversal of ethics. And whether we're seeing that reversal where things are turned inside out and upside down, Allah knows best. The Quran says that it will come as a surprise to the so, you know, baghtatan, it will just suddenly appear in a moment. So Allah knows best.
Allah knows best, man.
Yeah.
Without that discussion today, we could go very deep in this topic, you know.
Or you could,
Yeah.
maybe. I don't think I could go necessarily that deep.
If I go deep, I'll be using your book. I'll be using your work to get there, inshallah.
How fancy.
What's that in your hands, Bilal? Is that a new book that you've just published? What's in your hand? Pray, do tell.
You're asking some question. So this is the book that Sayyid Abbas wanted to discuss today. This is The Good Shepherd. And this is actually two parts. The first part is a collection of narrations of Isa alayhi salam in the Muslim corpus, right? So we have all these sayings of Isa, stories of Isa. And then the second part is an anthology on the topic from various authors, Muslim, non-Muslim. We have a couple Jewish converts to Islam, a couple Christian converts to Islam, as well as a practicing Catholic, well-known writer, Avelina Bellistri. So you get a lot of different perspectives, and you of course have some chapters by myself as well on Mary and on the end times and on the crucifixion and on is Jesus God, or what is his relationship with the
Yeah.
So it's about 310 pages. You can find it on Amazon. Some reviews are, the reviews are positive so far, alhamdulillah. I'm very happy with how it came out. And I mean, in a very short amount of time, like I started it in October and I finished it in December.
Wow.
Yeah.
Damn.
Day and night. And of course, I had to sing literature. There are other books, other anthologies on the topic, other compilations of ahadith on the topic. And I was able to find resources that were not previously published or translated. From Hilyat al-Awliya by Abu Nu'aym, as well as just from the hadith corpuses of Sheikh al-Saduq and others. Yeah.
Yeah. Had you finished Al-Amali before, or it was the overlap?
It was just after that. It was just after.
MashaAllah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so even that book, the Amali, has some very unique material. And again, like one of the reasons why I wanted to focus on this book, first of all, of course, Jesus being the bridge between the Muslim and the Christian world. Some would argue that it's Mary because we have a disagreement on the divinity of Jesus. Mary, the two Marys are a little bit more similar between the Christian and Muslim tradition. But still, I mean, as Muslims living in the West, we have a responsibility to know a little bit about Isa, to have some literacy of the Bible, which is still relevant in pop culture and in English literature and English film. But also I found that Isa has a message. There's a particular pattern and motif to his narrations in the Islamic tradition. They're not just random stories. The stories have certain themes. And the main theme of Isa's narrations in Sunni and Shia Hadith literature pertain to zuhd, what's called asceticism.
Without a doubt. Absolutely.
Right. Do you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you. It's cutting though. Is it your Wi-Fi or mine? I don't know, but I definitely hear the point you're making about zuhd. Yeah. I don't know.
So basically, zuhd it remains one of the major themes. Of course, there are biographical narrations of Isa about different parts of his life. Of course, there are also narrations that pertain to his divinity or lack thereof in the Islamic tradition. So it paints this picture of Isa that focuses not on the teachings about Jesus, but the teachings of Jesus. Right? And there's a difference, because we can argue all day about who was he vis-a-vis, divinity as the Son of God or as God incarnate. Do we agree with the monophysite view or the other view? And we can talk about that till the cows come home. But what a lot of people simply don't focus on are the actual teachings of Jesus. What does the Sermon on the Mount say? What did the Beatitudes say? What was style like? And you just find zuhd, asceticism all over. And that's extremely relevant to a time where we're kind of shut off from the world with COVID on some level. It's relevant to a time where we are consumed by materialism, where we're consumed by climbing the dominance hierarchy, as some may put it. And Isa alayhi salam came at a time where the people were wearing religion as a kind of badge of honor, right? In a sense, you have this today in the Muslim world. People with the longest beards and the shortest skirts, okay? And they're very concerned about where their feet are in prayer, and all of that's important, but they're not concerned about where their heart is in prayer.
Yeah.
And Isa is very, very different than Musa. Musa alayhi salam came to an enslaved nation. He came with a law, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. He came to bring the Bani Israel out of Egypt, out of bondage.
Yeah.
He came to make them into citizens, into law-abiding, law-interpreting citizens. Isa's time, he's already in an established society. He's in a time where there are temples and synagogues. He's in a time where there's a land, there's a state. He's in a time where there's scholarship, where people are praying and fasting. And what he sees is hypocrisy. What he sees is that people are practicing the letter of the law. They're practicing the kind of detail-oriented version of Judaism, but they're not focusing, or they're neglecting intention. They're neglecting experiential relationship with Allah. They're neglecting their duties towards each other. They're neglecting spirituality. And so Isa comes, just as Musa came with the letter of the law, Isa comes with the spirit of the law.
Yeah.
Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam comes with both. And so to really understand Muhammad, the Quran talks much about Musa. Musa is the most mentioned prophet in the Quran. So we need to also refine our understanding of Isa. And that's partly what I try to do in this book. And I found that much of the teachings of Isa, as found in the Hadith tradition, are congruent with even much of the Bible. There are many, many similarities. Now, of course, this is not a book of the historical Jesus, meaning I include traditions that are strong and traditions that are weak. So some of it is going to be considered, folkloric. But nonetheless, this is what the 8th and 9th century Muslims were hearing and what they were reading of Isa. And again, that theme of zuhud and that theme of the humanness of Jesus is emphasized consistently throughout the literature. So that's really what I wanted to look at. So, I mean, the book has a section, I mean, we talk about the birth of Jesus, Jesus' relationship with Yahya or John the Baptist. But then there are chapters on temptation. So there's a little bit of demonology, because it's Isa's conversation with Iblis. And Iblis is trying to tempt him. And Iblis is trying to get him to do things. And so Isa's responses to Iblis are very interesting. And in some cases, Iblis finds regret in himself. And he finds that he's not able to overcome Isa in his answers. But we talk about the miracles of Jesus, worldliness, materialism, wisdom and the value of wisdom, corrupt scholarship. This is very interesting. Isa really talks a lot about corrupt scholars.
Yeah.
Because again, he's coming to a people that have scholars and that have books, but he's saying that you guys are praying in public so that people can praise you. You guys are, and so if you instead of praying in public, close the door behind you, pray in private so that you can reflect intentions. Or for example, you know, Musa came to tell you to not commit adultery, but I command you to not think about adultery, because you may kindle a fire in a house and the smoke may ruin its decorations without burning the house. In other words, just thinking about it is polluting and corrupting your mind, right? He says that Moses commanded you to not lie while swearing in God's name, but I command you to not even swear in God's name. It doesn't matter if people believe you or don't believe you. Just speak the truth. Don't be abusing, you know, the wallahi card all the time and making it a habit. So there's so much. And honestly, this, like the process of writing, compiling, again, I mostly just compiled, translated, and it's a very humble and brief commentary.
I do like the sharh that you give to the different stories, because I think, like you mentioned just a second ago, you have the Musa life, you know, time period and the Isa time period, and you have ours, if that's a good way of distinguishing it. And I think you're right if you're implying that many of the issues we're facing now are issues that were occurring in Nabi Isa's time, where the batin was not being focused on, or where the letter of the law was prioritized over the esoterical. I think that probably does define quite a lot of how religious practice is done today. So it makes sense that we are having those Isa discussions more than those Nabi Musa discussions, because of the imbalance, you know, that exists. And I'm happy that you mentioned Zuhud as well, because honestly, if someone had asked me as a casual reader of Isa, ala nabiyina, of the overriding theme of his life, at least in the traditions, it's without a doubt Zuhud, abstinence. And in fact, in your book, you have a section on digital Zuhud as well, which maybe we can we can go into. But listen, I want to ask one quick thing before we go to all those things. And by the way, those who are listening, Assalamu alaikum to all of you. If you, just like me right now, enjoyed what Brother Bilal was just saying, I was loving that. Please follow the Monthly Reflections podcast for other amazing discussions like this. Here's what I like about what you just said. So you've compiled this book and you've gone through the method that you've just gone through. I want to ask you, what kind of man was Jesus? Bearing in mind the traditions and the culture, this man, like, who actually is he?
He was the spirit of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He was a man that was not of this world. He was a man that did not desire the frills and the fecundity of material goodness of this world. He was a man whose eyes were set on the relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He was a man that would look at stone and look at gold and not consider there to be any distinction between the two or any difference between the two. He was a man that was truly, you know, he was able to sleep basically in the dumps with the dogs, okay, and sleep wherever he went. He was a traveler. One of the opinions, popular opinions among some of the scholars on the name Masih or the title Masih is, you know, Mashahul Ard, that he would go from place to place as though he's wiping, right, the land. So he was traveling, he was sleeping wherever he would go. He didn't have a palace, he didn't have a wife, He didn't have belongings that he would go and worry about. And oh my God, I got to get the latest iPhone, and I got to clean up and get new shades and get new car and oil changes and this and that. Oh, look at the prices. He was someone that really tried to rely on as few things as possible. And I think that title, Ruh Allah, really summarizes him in that he was a spiritual being. He was not a being. All the major Ulul Azm prophets have titles, like Kalimullah for Musa, or like Khalilullah for Ibrahim. But Isa being Ruh Allah, being Kalimatullah, that was essentially who he was. That was entirely who he was. He was a man that really would, in one of the popular parables, of course, he tells the rich man to sell all his belongings and give it to the poor. And the rich man is saying, well, I can't do that. So then comes it's easier for the camel to go through the eye of the needle than for a rich man. But all things are possible with God. And that account we find in our hadith tradition and in the Gospels. And again, that idea of the camel going through the eye of the needle, that's also in the Quran as well. So, but with a different application. So that's who he was. And when Allah raised him, he had no possession but the garment that his mother Mary, alayhi salam, had knitted for him, had spun for him out of wool. Again, wool, not cotton, right? Wool is rough skin. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as Isa was being raised, according to this one tradition in Tafsir al-Ayashi, Allah tells him to throw away, cast off the thrills of this world. It's like, this one garment that you're holding on to, I want you to get rid of that for my sake.
Yeah.
And he does. And that's when Allah brings him to himself.
Wow.
So that's really who he was. And I want to say that the prescription, spiritual prescription, is different than Sharia. The prescription of Musa was a legal one. The people had to understand who they were, and they needed simple laws, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, because you're wandering in the desert. And in the desert, you don't have time for courts and trials and this and that. It's very simple. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. We've got somewhere to go. We've got enemies to fight. We've got people chasing us. We've got people that want to go back to idolatry. So you need something to keep to build a nation.
It's law as survival in many ways.
Right. And I think there are people, in many respects, we are living in a time where there is frivolity and decadence, and people do need sometimes some strict law. But in other cases, the spiritual illness is different. In other cases, the spiritual illness is a lack of a relationship with Allah. Lack of spirituality, a lack of morality and character, a lack of genuine, sincere scholars. And all of that requires a different kind of prescription. And the prescription for that would be zuhud, would be asceticism. It would be the purification that Isa was calling us to.
The best point of zuhud, and my favorite description of Isa comes from Imam Ali alayhi salam in Nahj al-Balagha. And I have asked you before to narrate it, and you have. And just to kind of make this point clear, I'm going to ask you again to go to the book, just to set up the narration for everyone listening. In one of the sermons, Imam Ali describes different prophets, not just one prophet, and describes what lessons were from their lives. So when it came to Nabi Musa, I think for him, you can see the greenness of the food he would eat in himself. You could see how he relied on this earth. And Nabi Dawood, when he comes to Nabi Isa, I think this is the most perfect description of the abstinence of dunya of any insan that I've seen described, which is how Imam Ali describes Nabi Isa. And then, by the way, for context, he follows describing, okay, here's that prophet, and here's how I am. And then he describes himself and says, I'm not going to say what he says by himself. Bilal, you can mention it. What's that sermon? And please go through that most beautiful description of Isa in Nahj al-Balagha.
I don't have it on me, honestly. I mean, it's in the book. No, I didn't have it ready, but on page 49. Let me just, I'll just give it 30 seconds, see if I can find it. But I found what I
have it memorized, yeah.
Aha. Yeah, found it. See, there you go.
So, Bismillah, Habibi.
So interestingly enough, this is a hadith that's also found in Hilyat al-Awliya by Abu Nu'aym.
Wow.
A lot of the time, we see it in one source. We assume, okay, it's the Nash al-Balagha. No, but it's also in Abu Nu'aym's Hilyat al-Awliya. So in Hilyat al-Awliya, we have this wording that Isa alayhi salam would say, my condiment is hunger, my emblem is fear, my apparel is wool, my warmth in winter is the sunrise, my lamp is the moon, my feet are my transportation, my food and my fruit are what grows from the earth. I sleep with nothing and I awake with nothing, and there is none upon the earth that is richer than me.
Wow.
And so in the sermon that you're referring to, he says, if you desire, I will tell you about Jesus, the son of Mary. He used a stone for a pillow. He put on coarse clothes and ate rough food. His condiment was hunger. His lamp at night was the moon. His shade during the winter was just the expanse of earth eastward and westward. His fruits and flowers were only what grows from the earth for the cattle. He had no wife to allure him, nor any son to give grief, nor wealth to deviate his attention, nor greed to disgrace him. His 2 feet were his conveyance, and his 2 hands his servant. So what we can see, and this is very similar to even what we have in the Gospels, in that in the Beatitudes, what Christians know as the Beatitudes, in Matthew chapter 5, verse 3 to 6, he says, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of God. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. And then in Genesis, you also have Yaqub, Jacob, sleeping on the stone as well.
Wow.
So he's a patron and an emblem for the downtrodden. That's what's amazing. And he wanted nothing from this world, from the frills of this world. You know, whether it's delicious food, whether it's soft cloth or smooth silk, or riding animals or a spacious home.
Or marriage, right?
I'm sorry?
Or marriage, I think.
He didn't get married.
So there's a question here about that. Maybe I'll mention it quickly. Sister's asking, was it Jesus' choice to remain single? We have many traditions in Shia Islam which say the worst among you are the singles. By the way, I think those narrations need a bit of qualification anyway. How can we resonate this in light of our traditions and the fact that Jesus will return with the Imam alayhi salam? So Jesus' choice not to marry, we can discuss how that links to singles, and because I don't think that narration applies in the same way. What's going on with Jesus' marriage? Like, this is, I'm sure, a very attractive man as well. He didn't want a wife. Why not?
First of all, he was a young man, and it's quite possible that in his return he would get married. That's one of the possibilities that's actually mentioned in the books of the scholars. However, most of the prophets were married. That is the sunnah of the prophets. He's the exception. Yeah. In the same way that you have ulama, most of them are married, but you have the exceptions that are not married. In general, the kind of the ethos of Jesus in the tradition is that he is not distracted by anything. And family, the Quran says that your azwajukum wa awladukum, like your wife, your spouses and your children, that they're a fitna. And so the prescription at his time is very different than the prescription of our time. We have different sharia, we have different standards, we have different problems. But nonetheless, he didn't marry. And one of the hadith says that he didn't have a wife to distract him, didn't have children to distract him. But you have this tradition in Hilyat al-Awliya, interestingly, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says or promises to marry him in the hereafter. And that have a huge wedding, and that all of the Zahideen would be invited. And that he is the supreme Zahid, right? That he is the archetypal Zahid or ascetic or monk.
Yeah.
All of these, Zuhad in the Akhirah, that they would come to his wedding and he would be married to, the Hur al-Ain.
Interesting. The Zuhad, ironically, are the ones who are avoiding weddings in the dunya now get to experience the biggest banquet in Akhirah.
Well, he was bringing people together in a different way.
Very true. Very true. That's beautiful. Here's what I was thinking while you were speaking. Obviously, Good Friday, is the excuse by which I've had you to come on this day, although I'd like to have you every day, really, is inshallah, the narrative. Oh, by the way, I'm coming to Toronto soon. I'm coming to Toronto in about in June, so we'll chill, man. It'll be nice. It'll be nice to see you, inshallah. Don't travel in the time that I'm coming. I find that very disconcerting. But inshallah.
I'm nothing like Isa in that regards. Okay, I'm at home. I have a alhamdulillah, mashallah house. But yeah, Isa.
I'll message you. I'll be like, Bilal, where are you? Be like, Ana Masih fil ard. I'm traveling, bro. I'll see you.
Alhamdulillah.
Here's what I want to ask you. Okay. Because I saw Ali Imran's listening to, and I think he's in Toronto, so maybe I need to make a day of it or something. I don't know. Okay.
Just avoiding me all.
Say that again.
I think the guy's scared of me. I think he's avoiding me. Like, Ali,
wow.
I'm on this podcast. Let's join. Let's see if he can.
Ali Imran will be on the podcast, inshallah, this one. And, I'm not going to say when because it's a surprise for the listeners. People have been asking.
Find a more resourceful person in the West who came out of the seminary system than Ali Imran. I found him to be incredibly helpful and resourceful and humble and willing to help others. So definitely everybody should check him out. I mean,
yeah, I know.
Like the episode you're on with him. Don't get me wrong, guys. Unless you should go that way. No. What I'm saying is, I'm personally grateful to Ali Imran for introducing me to your ideas and to you. I didn't know you before actually, and Ali Imran kind of was having a few conversations with you. And I would just mention now that Brother Bilal for the last year has been one of the most positive energies in my life personally. So thank you, Bilal, for being around, bro. Alhamdulillah. Don't be so shy. Okay. Now I'll come to my actual. I actually had a question. I was not. Good Friday. Yeah. What makes Good Friday good? You're gonna ask.
Yeah. So okay. Good Friday. What is the? We can discuss, biblical narratives, Quranic narratives, combining those together. And I know you said you've not written the history. I get that. But if we are going to try and decipher those few days, which are so contentious, could you give us a narrative of maybe Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, which is at least the belief which we are settled upon, which, comes from Quran and Hadith, which makes sense to us? How did those days actually happen? Good Friday, Saturday, Easter Monday, sorry. What's going on? So
in the book, I have a section on the crucifixion that goes over the various opinions, and there is no consensus, by the way, on the question you asked. So
what's your views? What I'm interested in. What's your opinion? What have you settled on at the moment?
Over what the various authorities have said, and then inshallah we can talk about what we find to be most realistic. And so I wrote a big section on this. Because what's a book about Jesus without addressing the crucifixion? So there are three main views. The first view is that he was substituted, that there was someone that came and substituted Jesus on the cross, either an enemy of Isa or one of the Hawariyin, the apostles. So if it's an enemy of Isa, it's typically seen as either Judas or one of the Roman soldiers or someone that basically betrayed him. And if it's one of the Hawariyin, Allahu A'lam, I mean, it could be Thomas. That's someone that I mentioned or explored as well. So that's the first theory, is a substitutionary theory. The second theory, and there's a great video on this by Dr. Ali Atai at Zaytuna. At Zaytuna College, he did a YouTube video. It's called, I guess, Crucifixion. Just search Ali Atai, Ataie, where he talks about the crucifixion in Islamic sources and what the various tafasir of that particular verse says. Because there's just one verse in the Quran, the وَمَا قَتَلُوهُ وَمَا صَلَبُوهُ وَلَكِنْ شُبِّهَ لَهُم. He was not killed. They did not kill him, nor did they crucify him, but it was made to appear as such. What that means is quite cryptic. What exactly that means is cryptic. So the first, substitutionary theory. The second, the Swoon Theory, what's called the Swoon Theory in academia. The Swoon Theory is the idea that Jesus was nailed to the cross and did not die on the cross. And it's a theory that's held by the Ahmadiyya, but more recently it's been held by Sunni Muslim polemicists or debaters like Ahmadidat and Zakir Naik. They've argued for this position, at least in debates anyway. And there is some evidence in the Bible that would suggest that this was not a clear-cut crucifixion of him dying on the cross. Because, for example, crucifixions would last like up to 4 days, but Jesus dies within a few hours. And he's buried in the tomb, allegedly, and the women come and they open up the tomb. And that's also not very typical for women, because in the Jewish tradition, like the Islamic tradition, you roll up the body, you put him in the earth, and that's it. So for to go and to open up the tomb and to bring spices and bring other things, it's almost as though they expected or wanted to make sure whether that really happened to him. Even Pilate was very surprised that he had died so quick. And you had, in the 1st and 2nd century, doubts. You had Basilides believed that Simon of Cyrene was crucified in Jesus' place. You had the Gnostic Apocalypse of Peter, which suggested that it was just the flesh of Jesus being crucified, not the spirit of Jesus. The spirit of Jesus was sitting on a tree laughing and watching the whole thing. And
that sounds very Greek mythos.
It does, and I mean, it's because the Gnostics had a problem with the idea of God dying.
Right.
In a sense, their solution was, well, it was just the fleshy part and not the spirit. Of course, what becomes the Orthodox position in Christianity is that Jesus is God in spirit and in flesh, and they don't have a problem per se with God dying physically in that case. Because anyway, I talk more about this in the book, but the third theory is that the verses in the Quran are specifically referring to the Jewish claim, because the verses that precede the verse of crucifixion, Ayat al-Salb, it's referring to the Jews, and that's the ayah saying, we killed the son of Mary, the messenger of God, and then the verse says, they did not kill him, nor did they crucify him. So one reading is that the Yahud did not kill him, that they were boasting in the 6th and 7th century, maybe, that they did kill him, but that this was not the case. Now, there are some scholars, maybe even Ghazali, for example, Abu Hatim al-Ghazali. Is that his name? I know it's just
Ghazali's
Abu Hatim al-Ghazi, but Ghazali, Abu Hamid al-Ghazali.
Yeah.
Ghazali seems to suggest that the Bible is intact. That was his opinion. Of course, most of us would basically believe that there are interpolations and fabrications in the Bible. But there were some scholars that affirmed the historicity of the Gospels, and so they believed that Jesus was crucified. And they believed that this verse, وَمَا قَتَلُوهُ وَمَا صَلَبُوهُ, is like, they didn't truly kill him. Allah is the giver of life. Allah is the giver of death. And the shuhada, or the martyrs, are with Allah. And Allah is the one that's, keeping them alive. Do not call the martyrs dead, but they are with Allah alive, and He is sustaining them, the Quran says. And Abu Hatim al-Razi, the Ismaili scholar, and Mu'ayyiduddin al-Shirazi, they took that position. These are Ismailis in the Fatimid period. They took that position. So what you have are those three that either substituted, swooned, or crucified, but Allah is the giver of life and death. Famously, Hallaj, the Sufi, he says, when he's being crucified, وَمَا قَتَلُوهُ وَمَا صَلَبُوهُ لَكِنْ شُبِّهَ لَهُم, to say that, look, I am you reuniting with the living God, that you cannot kill him. What I find most strong and most convincing in the Islamic tradition is the substitutionary theory, personally. I'll explain.
It's also, by the way, the most mainstream opinion, I think, among the Muslims now.
Mainstream opinion, first of all. So there are traditions about it. We can argue about the authenticity of those traditions, but those traditions exist. They're early. The Muslim community certainly took them seriously. Secondly, the issue with him being, because the Quran says, "Bal rafa'ahu Allah," like Allah raised up Jesus. Now, to say that, Allah raises all of us up. So when those who affirm Jesus' crucifixion, they're saying, oh no, God raised up his spirit. But God raised up all of our spirits, but it seems like in the tradition, Isa singled out with this expression.
I read this part in your book, by the way. Yeah, this section.
So in the hadith literature, it's always, this is the day that Jesus was raised up. And when Jesus was raised up, such and such happened. So he's being singled out with this expression. And we're all, so to me, that's an indication that it's more than just he died and was raised up. Similarly, I find that the biblical narrative on the crucifixion is contradictory in many ways, and there are a lot of like plot holes. There are a lot of reasons to doubt, either from a swoon perspective or from a substitutionary perspective. Now, whether it was Simon of Cyrene or Judas, or I think Tafsir ibn Abbas says it was a Roman soldier, I'm forgetting the guy's name, Tatianus or something, or whether it was Thomas, the apostle. By the way, Thomas, the word Thomas is To'am in Aramaic and Arabic as well, which means twin. And he was the twin of Jesus.
What a plot twist.
Plot twist, right? So Thomas, after the crucifixion, according to Christian narrative, he goes to India. Okay, he just going to India. And maybe he did, right? Because Jesus told him to proselytize and to preach to the nations. But what if that's just a convenient way to, like, you know, he goes away?
Escape strategy.
Well, maybe he was the one, because I put Ibn Kathir's account, which we also have. Well, it's in Ibn Kathir, it's in Tafsir al-Qummi, and the idea is that Isa told his apostles, "Who would like to take my place?" And so one of the young Hawariyin stood up, and then no, sit down. Who would like to take my place? And it was the same young apostle that kept standing up. And Isa initially didn't want this young man to take his place because, you know, he'd be dying a sure death at a young age. But nonetheless, this is the one that volunteered. And so Isa says, okay, then it's you. And this person took on the likeness of Isa alayhi salam and was crucified. Now, I do find the substitutionary position to be the strongest. I also think that another argument, and this is more of a literary criticism argument, is that the Quran is a text about triumph. There were prophets that were martyred, okay? But we don't find these long martyrdom stories in the Quran. What we find in the Quran is Nuh is delivered from the flood, Ibrahim is delivered from the inferno, Musa is delivered from Fir'aun, Isa is delivered from the cross, potentially.
Yunus.
This is what Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because this is what's relevant to his life. This is what's
such a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. So the idea that, because if the Quran was all martyrdom stories, then the expectation is that the ones that the Quran is being revealed to are going to experience such. But what we find in Saleh and Shu'aib and Lut and all of these stories is that the Prophet is saved, delivered, and the people are punished. And certainly Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was triumphant. So one can argue that there's a deliverance, there's a triumph, there's a divine intervention, just like in the stories of the other Ulul Azm messengers. But of course, Yahya is killed. Some say Zechariah is killed. But we don't find their martyrdom stories in the Quran. They're in the Hadith.
And that's a very good point.
Yeah.
Yeah. If we embed Nabi Isa in the other Anbiya, and he's Ulul Azm, so naturally it's going to be a particular prescriptive role for him. There needs to be a purpose to that story for the generation who's going to read the Quran. And you're right. If it's a martyrdom story, a tragedy story, the message is different to what it would have been if it's a revival story. He's going to come back and you have the whole messianic narrative alongside it. Like, these are two different stories completely. In fact, somebody's written a comment here which is linked to that. By the way, because if we're following on with this theory, Nabi Isa is then, he's with the Lord, he's in one of the heavens, or he's in, you know, in status in some degree or another. So he has a very distinct place among all the Anbiya right now, right? The question is a very good question. Can Jesus then intercede for us with Allah? Bearing in mind his position, can we ask him to help our du'as, get a response from God? Should we connect to Jesus like we should do the 12th Imam? That 12th Imam thing, I'll ask you not to respond to that because I'll come to that after. But listen, Habibi, Bilal, he's in a special position. He's in a special level. What's his role for my own personal spirituality with that in mind?
I don't know.
It's actually it's a good question, isn't it?
I mean, so look, there's nothing in the Islamic tradition where we call on Isa, right? And I mean, there might be a wisdom to that, There might be a wisdom to that. Again, so there's a whole debate among Muslims of is tawassul and istighatha. But let's say that it's all permissible. I've never found anything in the Islamic tradition which addresses Isa specifically. Addressing the messenger, sure. Addressing the awliya, yes. But addressing Isa, I've never seen it. Maybe that's an issue with kuffar, where there are all these rules about not resembling the non-believers. And of course, we know that the Christians are praying to Jesus. So, I mean, it's a good question, but ultimately, like the du'as we've been handed down in the Quran, in Sahifa Sajadiyah, in the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I mean, these are ad'iyah that are to God directly. And I mean, that's going to take precedence. And of course, the ziyarah literature, takes a further precedence than the kind of speculation of, okay, what if we pray to this guy?
And also shafa'at is not just about someone's rank, it's also about their function as well. And like their role in the community. And honestly, if you have shafa'at of the Holy Prophet for the ummah of the Holy Prophet, one wonders where else you need to go if you are seeking, if you're seeking tawassul of Ahl al-Bayt. To the listeners, now is a great time to ask any questions or mention your comments now before I ask what I think should be probably the last question from me. But if anyone has any thoughts or discussions, if I have missed anything as well in the chat, Abdullah, I see your comment about crucifixion. We've just discussed the 3 different perspectives there as well. We discussed marriage. So yeah, if anyone wants to comment, please do write them. My question to you now, Bilal. I felt peace calling upon him in church and also seeking healing for all. I agree. There's a very beautiful spirituality you get even with Christians when it comes to Jesus, mainly because of the unifying nature he has.
Be careful as to what we feel and how our feelings are, whether that is a criteria or measurement for what's true or what's moral or what's not moral. So there's that whole discussion. But nonetheless, I think that in his example, because the Quran is mostly correcting the Christian understanding of Jesus in terms of Trinity and in terms of crucifixion and in terms of atonement and in terms of the deification of Jesus in the Christian tradition, but also defending Jesus and Mary from accusations of
absolutely
some of the Jews at the time. But the Hadith literature, you see a Jesus that is a Zahid, a Jesus that is a very spiritual man, a man of few belongings, a man of complete devotion to God, a man that condemns the insincerity and hypocrisy of the scholars of his time. And he's an incredible example and incredibly relevant. I once wrote a little article called Saudi Arabia Needs Jesus, okay? And it's all about the kind of overemphasis on the fiqh and, again, the clothing and the beard and what have you. But then yet we have a materialistic culture. You have a culture that's quite shallow when it comes to Islamic spirituality. And so, ironically, I think in a sense, like you can make these comparisons between first century Judea, Palestine, and 21st century Muslim world, parts of the Muslim world, especially parts of the Muslim world which are, again, very naturalistic, very materialistic, very capitalistic. And we're in a time, and then here's another unique thing, and I just want to mention, without taking too much of your time, brother, if you don't mind.
No, of course. I'm only conscious that it stops after an hour. So I think we've got 5 or 6, 7 more minutes, and then it will stop, and I want to keep it in. I don't know why my Insta stopped after an hour. Like, it literally, I got to go into the settings and change it. But yeah, you keep going. We'll just start a new room. I don't mind. But go ahead.
We have a unique political situation in Isa's time. You have a unique political situation because on one hand, you have rabbis who are working with Rome, and you had the Herodians, so these were Roman puppets. But on the other side, you had the Zealots, and the Zealots wanted to overthrow the Romans by any means necessary. And we find that Jesus is kind of neither here nor there. He's either the any means necessary, let's seize power and let's conquer, but he's also not a puppet of Rome, and he criticizes the rabbis, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, because of their hypocrisy and their double standards. So he's taking almost a position of Allah does not change the condition of a people until they change what is in themselves. This is a well-known Islamic principle based on, and it's a principle that the imams themselves, most of them, were upholding that, look, if every imam had risen up with the sword, we wouldn't have a religion. We wouldn't have texts. We wouldn't have a hadith. We wouldn't have these lessons of humility and of forbearance, right?
Yeah.
Oppression. And so Isa is doing the same thing. Isa is saying, look, this side is working for Rome, and that side is just... And by the way, right after Jesus, 132, you get the Bar Kokhba revolt. In the Bar Kokhba revolt, the Jews just chose a Messiah, and then they rebelled against the Romans. But that led to Hadrian coming and just annihilating the Jewish state and destroying Jerusalem from, completely, totally.
Yeah.
And it remained that way. The Temple Mount was a dump, like a literal dump. And Jews were not even allowed into Jerusalem. And at the time of the Prophet, Jerusalem was not known as Al-Quds. It was known as Ilia. If you go to the prophetic ahadith, it's known as Ilia, which is the Latin name because it was called Ilia Capitolina. The Romans had built a city just next to the destroyed Jerusalem, just outside of it. And this was a city that only Romans were allowed to go into, and non-Jews were allowed to go into. And Jews were only allowed to come in, I think, once or twice a year during like the anniversary of the temple destruction. So Jesus is in a very interesting position, because he's a person that believed that the Bnei Israel had to be reformed. They had to be rectified. Before we can find political rectification, we had to return to God, return to ourselves, and make a covenant with Allah and renew our covenant with Allah, as opposed to just rebelling and having revolution senselessly. And I think that's a huge lesson even in the Arab world today.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, and it's useful for us as people in the ghaiba to be thinking about as well. There is a very precise lesson to take from Nabi Isa in that regard, about your own political climate right now and waiting for your imam and all of these things. Because Nabi Isa has such a distinct role in the ghaibat as well.
Allah says in the Quran, اليوم أكملت لكم دينكم وأتممت عليكم نعمتي. Islam is finished, it's complete. But the spiritual prescription of the time may be different from wali to wali. And so we find that the time of Hussein, alayhi salam, for example, was a time where you couldn't just be doing tawaf around the Kaaba. If you really wanted to actualize sacrifice, which is what Hajj is all about, you're wearing your grave clothes, you're sacrificing an animal, you're remembering the sacrifice of Ismail, right? That was supposed to happen. You're remembering Safa and Marwa. Like, it's about sacrifice. You're remembering Yawm al-Qiyamah on Mount Arafah. It's about sacrifice. And at the time of Hussein, if you really wanted to actualize the principle of Hajj, you had to go with him. You had to go with him. You do Hajj, you go with him. That's the true purpose and principle. And so he had to cut his Hajj short because he was going to go actualize the principle of Hajj. And so the prescription is different. You might be doing the right thing at the wrong time and not get the right results. The prescription at our time, of course, you need to be a hierophant or a clairvoyant person to understand the landscape and the climate. But if we're living in a time of rampant materialism and rampant legalism and hypocrisy in that legalism, then certainly Isa's message is more relevant than ever.
Yeah, and especially Shahr Ramadan as well. To everyone listening, we are engaging in our own abstinence practice every day.
That's why we wanted to do this. Ramadan's not about hunger and thirst, guys. That's the minimum. That's the Sharia. That's what we all have to do. Okay? Anyone who's healthy and capable. Ramadan is about becoming a better person. Ramadan's about, we need food and water and sex, right? And if we can abstain from food, water, and sex, then we can abstain from anything. We can conquer those desires, then the attachment to anything else can be conquered. So this is a time where we're supposed to detach, we're supposed to return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we don't know if this is going to be it. This might be the last Ramadan. It might be. I'm not saying it is. But I'm saying this might be it. We have COVID, we have Russia and NATO doing their little thing. Like, this we don't know if we're going to make it, even on an individual level. We might die. before we get to the next month of Ramadan. So in these nights, especially in the last 10 nights, we really have to be emphasizing, and the Layal al-Qadr, we have to be emphasizing change, not just worship. Worship is extremely important for discipline, but it's also about a full renewal and a full change for the coming year, inshallah. That means a change of character. It means abstinence from all that Allah deems haram. It means that we must wean ourselves away from the dunya and return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yeah, and with that, we ask all the listeners to pray for us in your ibadat in this holy month as well. And
we still have like 5 minutes, dude.
do we? I want to make sure we end before, like, because then it like those listening, it just goes randomly really quickly.
Listen,
and I don't look cool, bro. It just goes, man.
Do you ever drive when like there's no gas and you just want to see how far it goes? It's like, let's just drive this clown car till it runs out of gas.
I have successfully achieved not dying until now. And inshallah, it's in God's hands. No, I think we should end now. I think we should, because it's actually a beautiful point to reflect on in the month of Ramadan.
Interview till the wheels come off. Come on, let's go.
Me and you could, you know what? I'll do the goodbye now, and then we just keep talking and see when it cuts. But okay, genuinely, because there are people who listen later online on Spotify and these things. So this is a good time to say thank you to Brother Bilal for what we say is the initial thoughts you have shared with us. Bro, I really enjoyed it, especially on the Zuhud of Nabi Isa for Shahr Ramadan. That ending, I think, ties this whole thing together of what's the point of reflecting on people like this, except that you may replicate some of these practices for your own personal spirituality and go back to that that way of understanding God, which is not, legalistic and in many ways hypocritical. It is authentic and it is connected to the world in which we're in. And actually, no one who's come on this podcast has given us that message quite like you. So thank you, Bilal. God bless you. Thank you to the listeners, for those who are listening, inshallah. Tomorrow's podcast will be something else, and I'm not going to announce it yet. Announce it at Fajr. But Bilal, could you give a shout out to those who are listening as to why they should follow this podcast? Could you make a little case for us?
A case for who?
For my podcast.
Oh yeah, I mean, watch this podcast. I'm on it. Ron is on.
That's it. That's done. Where can people buy your book, by the way?
Don't you have Sayyid Ammar on your ad? Is he still coming?
Yeah. Inshallah, Sayyid Ammar will come. We're discussing what day, but yeah.
Sayyid Ammar is a legend. What do you need me to say?
You've done it. Last thing I'll give to you. Where can people get your book? Where can they buy it so they can follow on these discussions?
I'm not a big fan of corporate monopolies. I condemn much of what Amazon has done in terms of its mistreatment of workers. But currently, this is the medium by which we purchase this book and get it delivered in an efficient amount of time. So it's called The Good Shepherd: Jesus Christ in Islam by Bilal Muhammad. And of course, it's again, like, it's not just me. If you're gonna buy it for the Jewish converts who read about Jesus. I mean, that's an incredible story about that were raised to kind of not think much about Jesus or to think maybe negatively about him, and then to see him positively through an Islamic light. I mean, that's just, to me, an incredible achievement. Alhamdulillah. But again, we got Christian perspective, Sunni, Shia. This is really a book that's supposed to crown and bring and build bridges between the various communities. Inshallah,
it has that function for us, all of us, inshallah.
Please keep me in your du'as.
Of course.
Don't forget me in your du'as, because this is an important month for all of us. And I need your du'as for health and for rizq and for marriage, of course, and
inshallah,
other good things in life, inshallah. But
all the best, Brother Bilal.
Allah gives us, inshallah, we should be content with it, and we should accept it. And contentment is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts worry and anxiety in discontent, and He puts really contentment in patience. So if you're able to be patient in this world, then, if you can get knowledge, you can be humble. And if you're humble, you can be grateful. And if you're grateful, you genuinely are happy and you feel lucky.
Beautiful. We have 10 seconds. That's a beautiful way of ending. Inshallah, we can follow that. Take care, everybody, before it cuts out. Thank you, Brother Bilal, for those nasihat. Ma'asalam, fi amanillah. Thank you so much, Bilal.
That would be nice.
Yeah, follow Bilal as well. And follow the podcast. Follow everyone, buy the book, inshallah, and pray for us, inshallah.
Ma'asalam.
Keep the love going. Ma'asalam.